Prospect Park is in Minneapolis. We're right by the U of M, Southeast Minneapolis. And the Witches Tower, if you're familiar with the area, that's in our neighborhood, and that's why it's part of our logo. The start of this climate action plan, where it came from, was what was mentioned earlier in Jason's presentation, was the Amazon burning. In the summer of 2019, that's when it happened. That was also the same time I became chair of the neighborhood's environment committee. It was very unexpected. Somebody stepped down suddenly. And at that moment, you know, the world is on fire basically. And it really moved me. It really got to me. And as I looked around for what could be done, I did look at climate action plans at the state level, at the city level, and I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. There's not a disconnect, there is a gap between organizations and governments doing something and the individual doing something. And on top of that, I am a data analyst by profession. And it is very important to me to know that my individual actions make a difference. So with that in mind, I started to look at what could bridge this gap that I'm talking about. And I thought, well, let's do a neighborhood climate action plan, one at the neighborhood level. I spent several months on this, and I am fortunate to have neighbors who are very involved with the environment movements, who read early drafts and provided feedback. I got references for other people to look through. It's a short document. We're not going to go over it tonight. It's only like 3 or 4 pages, but we really wanted to make sure we encompassed a lot of things. And one of the last changes we made, somebody said, well, you want to call out neighborhood resiliency. And I'll be honest, back in 2019, I was like, thinking that meant maybe we had to look at sewer systems being replaced. I mean, I really was not focused on it. But it was very important that we added this to our climate action plan. So let me just give you a very high level overview of the climate action plan as it was a year and a half ago. I got the neighborhood board's approval on this. They endorsed it. That was a strategic move on my part. And then we stated our mission to achieve sustainability and resiliency through local, strategic, and measurable initiatives. The sustainability model you see before you, you're going to find that in almost all climate action plans, because you got to make any actions bearable, they have to be equitable, and they have to be viable. And so my committee comes back to this model quite often. If we tend to, it's easy to get pulled into one direction more than another. It can be easy to get pulled into focusing on maybe rain gardens while we're ignoring the social needs in the neighborhood. So it's really a touchstone for us. The strategy we wanted and we've put in our climate action plan is basically neighbors helping neighbors. We're building that community. And the reason this is so important is for everything that Jason talked about, all of those extreme weather patterns. We're not going to be able to survive them unless we're all in this together. So on top of mitigating climate change, we are also preparing for climate change and building a stronger community. The reward to this is just the quality of life is improved. It's not just that a strong community makes everybody do better. It's sustainable living in of itself is economically smart. I think we need to stress that a lot. I insulate my home. I have lower heating bills. It's a no-brainer. I mean, if we no other conversation than that, and a lot of people start looking at insulating their old homes. The map on the left is my neighborhood. I apologize, it's a little blurry. It's only about it's less than a square mile. but it's got a wide range of people. I'll get to that in a couple slides. Also at the beginning of this, we had a kickoff scheduled for the end of March. I think you can all see where that's heading, but before we get to that, our initial focus was going to be on reducing residential energy use. The idea of focusing on one initiative that would give us time to mature our communications and metrics, to build better relationships in the neighborhood, and just really sort of work out the kinks so that we could add on different initiatives. And then the other thing about improving residential energy use is that improvements made are gonna outlast me. Like, I just got a heat pump. The next person, if I sell my house tomorrow, it's not even a behavioral change. I have changed the structure. I have automatically made my house produce less greenhouse gases. So this was we thought about this a lot. But then, if we all remember March 2020, COVID strikes. So 2 weeks before our big kickoff, Walz shut down the state. It was just heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. But it was also a learning lesson, because we had to scramble to get COVID-19 information out to our neighborhood. Suddenly we realized, wait, we have a web page. How do we get a new, an information page up there? We have 14,000 people in this neighborhood. And when we looked at the email lists that go out, it gets to about 1 in 7. So we distributed flyers in very much a rush. So this was an interesting event, because it really brought home some of the issues we had in the neighborhood. So the challenge, it was to unite the community. And this is something we're still working on. We're not even like a 10% of the way there. But things to keep in mind was our population tripled in 10 years. A majority of people active are homeowners and older. Our average age is 25 years old, but the people involved, the average age is more like 60. And then we also have a very diverse population. Behind me is public housing. In front of my house is probably a $500,000 house. So there are all of these challenges. Over the next year in 2020, and then of course the last 6 months, we worked on building community and relationships. So we've got our committee. We start with people that you would expect an environment committee to reach out to: the park board, the garden club, Friends of the Mississippi. We also reached out to the local schools. Venture Academy is a high school, and as well as the Minneapolis Office of Sustainability. The ones at the end here are the ones that may be outside of where people normally think of environmental activities. And it's also the places, Jason, if you're looking for a place to give your talk to, look at your local senior center. We also worked with, continue to work with Community Driven, who rescues food. Food waste contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. There are churches in the neighborhood that we work with quite a bit. And then finally, what might surprise you, we work quite a bit with CenterPoint Energy. They provide the data so we can tell if our goals are where we are with the goals. And I do want to call out, for especially with Southeast Seniors and Community Driven, right there, we are looking at our most vulnerable population. So as we look at everything we need to do to help mitigate climate change, we got to keep the most vulnerable people in mind. So a year passes, we have agreed we're going to touch back on the climate action plan every year, and we realized we missed a big few words when we first stated it. It's not just the climate action plan, it's also the neighborhood resiliency plan. And then we've decided we can kick off our first official initiative, which is 25% by 2025. 25% by 2025 is to reduce natural gas in our neighborhood based on census tract, 25% in the next 5 years. Why natural gas? That's a question I get quite often. Well, when we look at the city of Minneapolis, and I realize not all of you are from Minneapolis, that is the #1 cause of greenhouse gas emissions. And then if we look at that pie chart a little further, transportation and electricity, which also take up a big portion, they have initiatives in place to mitigate and bring down greenhouse gas emissions. There's Excel's and Clean Energy Transition and MPCA's Clean Cars program, which just went through. Just comparing electricity and natural gas, electricity causing greenhouse gas emissions, that's going down. It's on track to be 0 by 2050. In the city of Minneapolis, natural gas is going up. It's not on track to go down at all. So this really made sense to focus on it. The other part of it is that my neighborhood is a lot of old houses. My house is over 100 years old. If we look at natural gas use in the state, in 2019, it was 96 decatherms for the state, but the city of Minneapolis, it was higher, again, probably because of the age of buildings. This is per 1 to 4 unit housing. So it's on average, residents are using more natural gas. When we look at my lovely, lovely neighborhood of Prospect Park, it pops up to 119. Prospect Park houses used almost 20% more natural gas on average. 30% of those dwellings use more than 131, which means that 30% of the houses are really pulling the number up. And as I mentioned before, I have learned sort of the hard way that if I also call out that use of more energy means that they're paying the highest energy bills in the state, suddenly I have more people interested in our initiatives to get houses better insulated and upgrades to energy equipment, which at this point is pretty much the only way we can reduce natural gas use. I wanted to share this as well. It is the back of a flyer we sent out early on this year. It shows our approach to getting people to commit to these changes, because the reality is everybody has to, everything is important. Everybody's got to do something. And now we know everybody's not going to do it, but it's going to be a 5-year process. It can seem overwhelming if we tell people that you got to get it done right now. So we're taking this approach of, hey, okay, have you had a recent energy audit? Are you up for one? If you're not, that's fine. Start where you can. You guys all know life is just hard. There are just times you are not going to ask somebody who's going through a death in the family or a loss of a job. There's got to be compassion to this approach as well. So this is why we set this up as well. Along with the message that I hope is clear is that we're not just telling people, hey, do this. We're saying we're giving you the tools. We're giving you the information. Here's the website. Here is where you can get free materials. Here is where you can get information on rebates. So this is something that I have gotten a pretty positive response to. And then just looking overall at our recent and current initiatives of our committee, because there's so much to be done. We had just got signs made in the last month, 25% by 2025 to get the discussion rolling. Next week is National Night Out. We have people acting as ambassadors for the program to answer questions, no hard sells, but just to be there to answer questions. And a lot of the questions are related to what people asked Jason about at the end of his talk. And so I'm drafting a talking points for the people willing to be ambassadors. And in addition to that, we are also, we got 3 grants or 2 grants, we're still waiting on the third, to get community rain gardens, and those will be put in by the end of August. So there's a local church, public housing, and the senior living center will all get rain gardens, which will make them more resilient in the face of climate change. So this is, it can feel a bit overwhelming at times, but it's really a neighborhood encompassing approach. I also included our Earth Day cleanup. I think a lot of neighborhoods have that. And I wanted to call out that we are not stopping any of the traditional environment neighborhood stuff, but we are changing it a little bit. And I see I have a little bit of time, so I'm just going to add for example, with Earth Day, in our budget, we had some money to offer prizes for kids sending in pictures of themselves picking up trash. And that was wildly popular. So we're starting to, we're trying to look at it like, how do we get more money into the community? How do we make it more resilient? And overall, how do we get a measurable progress in mitigating or reducing climate change? And I really think it's possible. My very last slide is, if any of you, if this appeals to any of you, some options that you could look at. I am more than happy to talk to anybody about the Climate Action Plan in more detail. Clearly, there's a lot here. I did want to call out the Transition Town movement as well, if you're not aware of it. I read up on it a lot. It is, and I've taken a lot of their ideas about community building. I did not go with it because they do not really focus on measuring things. And I love measuring things. It keeps me going. And then just if that feels, if neighborhood feels too big, if you belong to a church or your kids go to school or, there's a local VA you're part of, those are all places to have that community sense in all of that. And then if any of this, if you only wanted to do it at the block level, there is a book by a guy named David Gershon called Low Carbon Diet that was very helpful. So I know this was a lot of information that I threw at everybody very quickly, but that's what I got. So let me stop sharing and see what people think.
Nice job, Mary. Great job of organizing the community and creating a model for others to use.